Hey everyone, happy to see you, and just going to go ahead and start the webinar right off. So today we're gonna talk about Office.js, and if I can find my slides here, I can show you the agenda from today. So after a brief introduction, I'm actually going to introduce you to the concept of Office.js add-ins first, so a little bit talk about what they are, how they work, and how you typically interact with them. And then sort of like we're gonna get to the points like, which parts are difficult in Office.js. So split that into two parts before we then can finally sort of like we know enough to then finally move on to number 7 and see how Python and also xlwings come into play and can hopefully make a few things easier. Before I start off, I want to tell you that this webinar is recorded. You will automatically get the recording. And I would encourage you to put any questions you have in chat. So that is here. And whenever I get a minute, most likely towards the end of the presentation, I will have a look at the chat and then try to answer those questions in real time. Okay, so then let me get started here with the introduction. Let's obviously not spend too much time here. Let's focus on the content. So I'm the one who created xlwings a couple of years ago. I then wrote a book, which also miraculously is already 2 years ago right now. Time flies. And then I'm also working on another product, which is called XL Trail. And that one is basically version control for traditional Excel workbooks. You can connect it to a Git or GitHub, or you can drag and drop the files directly on Excel Trail. At the end, what you get is you get a look into your workbooks, and you can get these diff views or comparison views to understand, who made which changes, why, and when. So like the traditional answers that Git gives you for example, Python source code. Now, before we get started, I'm always happy to sort of connect with you if you like. If you're interested in what I'm going to talk about today, then make sure to follow me either on Twitter or LinkedIn. There, the topics are mostly the same. But then on the xlwings channel on YouTube, it's obviously a bit of a different content, obviously interactive sort of webcasts. So either pick Twitter or LinkedIn, and then maybe also follow on the xlwings channel. All right, so so much for the introduction. And so let's see what this Office.js actually is. And unfortunately, as so often with Microsoft products, I sort of have to start with like a disambiguation of the term, of the terminology. So just to make sure you know what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the lower part here, the Office.js, which is sort of like a short name for the Office JavaScript API. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The other thing is a different thing, technically, is built on top of Office.js, which is Office Scripts. And just to really quickly show you what Office Scripts is, it's this guy here, the Automate tab in Excel. You may not have it just yet if you're not using one of the latest version of Office 365, but you most likely will get it soon if you are on 365. If you have the perpetual license, I believe you will not get it. But that's, again, not the thing that we're talking about. So like, if that's the thing you're looking for, probably time for you to jump off and save a bunch of time on your end. So today we're going to talk about the left-hand side here. We're going to talk about Office.js that allows us to create ribbon add-ins, task panes, user-defined functions, and also content add-ins. Content add-ins would be those little like controls you can place on a worksheet, which could, for example, show you a JavaScript-based chart. Today, though, we're mostly going to be focusing on task panes, on ribbon buttons, not so much or not at all really on the custom functions or the content add-ins. And again, no Office scripts for you today. So what is the Office.js add-in really? So Office.js add-ins are proper web apps, and the web app is really just an app that's broken up into two pieces, right? So on the left-hand side, you have this client or the front end. Most often, it's the browser in our everyday life. And then on the right-hand side, you have the server or the backend, where things like Python or other programming languages run. And so this is really, the way that the internet works, and it is absolutely the same for Office.js add-ins. So you really have these little web apps that you then make available or host within the Excel application. And that works within the web-based version of Excel, but also within the desktop version of Excel. And unlike Office scripts, this does work on the perpetual classic versions of Excel back to, well, I would say mostly 2016 or even before sometimes. And so in a few bullet points here, there's really lots to love about Office.js. First of all, no more VBA. There's lots of things, lots of good things that come out of that. One of those is obviously you have the deployment options available via the add-in store. So there's sort of like trying to solve one of the long-standing issues that the VBA add-ins had. We've already touched upon what type of different add-ins and content you can create. So ribbon, task pings, etc. We will touch on these. But then also very importantly, they run everywhere, and even on an iPad, which is quite unique there. And then also super important is you get all the benefits from the web technology. And that means, for example, you can design really nice user interfaces. So no need, to get back to the user form that look like it's the 90s still. Also, it's the web technology. So like, you decide what stays on the server and what actually goes into the workbook. And so you can keep all the important things that nobody should see on the server, which is a very good thing. And then also sort of like connected to that, Office.js gives you a solid way to run authentication, and they have even the SSO built in, the single sign-on option. So when you use Excel 365, you are logged into your Excel instance, and that identity can be verified on the backend. So like that's a very, very neat mechanism there. And then also quite important, I guess, in my view, at least from talking to clients, is this thing runs on your infrastructure, it runs on your servers, and it doesn't need any of the Microsoft infrastructure. It can even run locally, so like you would not even have to be connected to the internet. You just have to run the backend on your local host, on your local machine. So that's a little bit of an overview of what Office.js is and what's it got in the store. Now what I think always is very helpful to get a presentation started is to actually, get something up and running. So what we're going to do next is we're going to play around with the simplest Office.js add-in, and the simplest Office.js add-in consists of only two files. So one file is the configuration. It's called manifest. It's an XML file. You load it into Excel, and that sort of like tells Excel, where your backend server is. It basically gives it the URL of your backend, and also sort of, defines, for example, like which ribbon buttons you want to show. That is what the configuration does. And then on the right-hand side, you can see there is this single HTML file that has our JavaScript code in it. And that HTML file we're going to upload to the server. And that's really all you need. That is a fully functional, production-ready Office.js add-in. So to run through this, I've created a little repository. I can paste that that thing here into the chat so that you can go there, and if you like, you could follow along. So as I said, there is a single HTML file, and at this point, that is nothing to do with Python and xlwings. It's the bare bones Office.js functionality. So this is the repository that I built, the Hello World repository. You can see there is this task pane HTML file, and then we have the manifest XML file. These are the two files that are running our add-in. Apart from that, really, it's literally just a README file, the thing down here. We got a PNG file, that's the screenshot down here. And then we got like a folder full of just these little icons that are used on, on the interface. But apart from that, really, these two files here, the HTML and the XML. So to get this started, what you can do is you go into that XML file. You use this new GitHub functionality to download a single file, which I love. And then you could go into your Excel application. But what you will need to do to run this sort of like in a developer mode is what they call sideloading. So I've included here, I've included instructions for how to sideload such an add-in into all the different versions of Excel. But the easiest way of doing it is by using an Excel online. But that's just the easiest way. It's not the only way. We're going to switch over to the desktop version later on. So as I said, the easiest way is go to Insert, Add-ins. And by the way, this works on a free account also. And then you have this Upload My Add-in here. So I'm going to go to Downloads, select that XML file that I've downloaded a second ago, click on Upload. And as you can see, I have instantly this new Hello World tab with a nice greeting here and a button which says Show Task button, Show Task pane. And so this thing opens, as you can see here on the right-hand side, obviously as easy as possible, because this is, as I said, this is the easiest possible Office.js add-in. So what it does is you can select a range here. You can click on the Run button, and it'll actually turn everything yellow, and then also write the selected range into the upper left corner. So like if I do that again over here, you can see that it updates this. So this is how easy it is basically to run an instance of an Office.js add-in. And all you need is this GitHub repository with these two files. And if you look at the README here, then you can see that the HTML file here, the web server, is really basically provided by GitHub Pages. If you click on the link here, this gives you instructions on how to set your repository up to serve these files here via the GitHub page, via GitHub Pages. But in essence, it's really just you go to Settings, click on that Pages item entry here, and then enable your deployment from here. And so like every time you do create a change on your HTML file or on any of the other files of the XML file too, it'll rerun that deployment. It'll host the new HTML file for you. And as you can see, I've just opened that HTML file. Things are pretty much as easy as they could be. So switching back real quick to the slides here, if I find them. Yeah, so like pretty much taking this a little bit ahead of time. So there's a lot of boilerplate on that HTML file. So there's a little bit of HTML boilerplate. There is loading and initializing the Office.js library. There's like getting a button on that HTML page and connecting it to like the click event. So that's all happening in the top part of the file. And then only like in the lower part, what I've selected here in red, this is our actual JavaScript Office.js code. And so to develop that, to sort of like play around with that code, there is a nice tool that that Microsoft created. And I mean, at this time, we could switch over here to the desktop version here. So the nice tool is basically called ScriptLab. And it's an add-in, which itself is an Office.js add-in. I believe I do have, yeah. So it's an Office.js add-in. It's open source. So if you're interested, you could look at this at the source code. And it would allow you to play around with Office.js code and get instant feedback. And though it's important to note, it's a playground. It doesn't store your code permanently, so use it wisely. So in that sense, what I'm going to do now is I'm going back here to the code that we have. I'm going to copy that code, and then I'm switching over to the script lab. And I forgot to mention, to get the script lab installed, again, go to insert, get add-ins, which will give you that add-in store, and then you have it here, or you can also search for it, and then you should be able to just click on the add button, which will then make that tab here available in your Excel file. And so we can go here and say code, and then we can say, we can go here, we can make this also a little bit bigger, and we can say new snippet. And so the code I've just copied, I can just basically paste this on this end, and then just say run this. And then I get this little run button. And so basically it should behave absolutely the same as what I've just previously shown you, as in the Hello World tab, by installing or by side loading this the full add-in. And so what you could do now is you can go into the source code again and say, okay, well, let's make this red. Then go back, and indeed it does what it does. It does what it should do. And if you're happy with your changes, then you could copy again the code. So for example, down here, you could copy the code and copy it, paste it back into the HTML file, commit your changes to GitHub, and your new version of the add-in is up and running. So that's sort of like a very easy workflow that works very nicely if you are completely new to this Office.js ecosystem. All right, so let's get back to the slides to see like what I've missed. By the way, at this point, it's not important to look at the code really that we were manipulating. I mean, you could see easy enough. It was setting the property to yellow, like the background color, and then we changed that to red. We are going next up. We're just going to go a little bit deeper into that syntax, but definitely you can look at it on your own schedule. But that was not the purpose here of that introductory sample. So yeah, as I said, we were side loading it, but for production, you would then basically distribute it internally within your company via the Office admin. So you can really just upload it to your Office installation. You can even like push it out to people so they wouldn't even have to install it manually. Or if you go public, then you will have to submit your add-in to Microsoft. So sort of like similar to the process that exists, you know, for like the Apple App Store or the Android Play Store. So that is if you want to make your add-in available to everybody in Excel. But I guess like most of the time you would just distribute it internally via the Office admin user there. And also, sort of like importantly, GitHub Pages is just like a backend web server that serves static files. So you give it the HTML file, it just serves that HTML file, and that's pretty much it. So nothing else involved on the backend, as simple as it gets. The whole logic sits in that single HTML file. So we've seen that, just to sort of like reiterate on that. So the XML file defines sort of like how my add-in looks like. And then, you know, for example, defines, okay, it has this one single show task pane button in that tab, which is called Hello World. And when you click the task pane button, it shows this task pane HTML. So it opens this up on the side. Very much what we've gone through. We've gone through that, we've played around with it, and we've seen how ScriptLab works. Definitely sort of your first sort of like stop to get into Office.js as a playground. But yeah, don't forget about that part. So this is a playground. Copy your code outside if you want to keep it. And so we're moving on to what's so wrong, you know, with this whole thing. So what's wrong with Office.js? So part one is the API, and then that's the thing sort of like we've jumped over before. So let's see what's going on here. All right, so like what we'd like to do is we would like to loop through all the sheets of a workbook and print the value of the cell A1 in each of them. So over here, you can see this is the desired output. And like for all the VBA developers amongst you, this is probably sort of a, you know, a 30 seconds thing. You just have this for loop and you print the sheet name and the value of that range, and you're done with it. Now, if you have looked into Office scripts, and again, this is not the thing we're talking about today, this is the other thing, but it comes in quite nicely as a comparison or sort of like understanding what Office scripts does differently. So in Office scripts, this is actually pretty much one-to-one the same as in VBA. You just have to use JavaScript syntax. That's pretty much all of it. Also, as easy as it gets. I mean, basically the single line in a loop, and that's pretty much it. For those of you who have used or are using xlwings, yeah, same story, a single for loop. Since it's Python, it obviously has is a little bit easier to read. But that's pretty much it. And so now if we switch over to Office.js, there's like a page full of code that you have to write for, you know, what's sort of just like a two-line code in Python or VBA. And so that's a little bit of an issue. So like to identify these issues in more detail, you cannot just like, for example, you cannot loop through a collection just like that. So I cannot just loop through the worksheets here. I will need to loop through the worksheets.items, which is, you know, it's a little bit awkward. But then it's not just awkward in the syntax. It's also, well, I can only access the items if I load the items first. And, you know, after loading them, I can only access them once I call the synchronize method here. So there's a couple of things that are, well, that will just cost you a lot more effort to achieve. And since we have to loop through the sheets first, and then only are we able to load the values in those sheets, what you're ending up with is, the need to have two for loops. So we have the for loop to loop through the sheets, and then load the values in the sheets, and then also again having to call the sync here. So that makes it extremely awkward. And then once we have this, only then we can run, basically the loop, which corresponds to the loop of the previous examples in VBA and Office scripts. And then also a big topic is error handling. So like what you need to do is catch errors in here. So for example, if let's say you're referring to a sheet, that sheet is usually there, but it isn't there now, you will end up here, right, in the error handler. But the issue with that is the way I have it in here, just logging that error doesn't show it to the user yet. So like you still have to come up with a way of showing that error to the user, which means you either need to design an HTML form and load that HTML form and populate it with that error message and handle all that thing as another like 2 pages of code, or you need to go back to the task pane and have a little pop-up or like an alert that pops up in the task pane showing the error message. So there's lots of things here involved that just kills the developer productivity, but also, I guess, a little bit the fun of it. And I guess, I mean, that, Office.js was born in 2012. So basically came out with Office 2013 for the first time. And so just now, or basically like in 21, I believe, they came up with Office scripts, which sort of like get rid of all this, right? So like it works again like VBA. You don't have to like load stuff. You don't have to sync stuff. You don't have to do your error handling because the errors are shown in basically that pane where the scripts run. So that's all handled for you. That's sort of like the way we would expect an Office or like an Excel automation script to work. The only thing is, as I said initially, this doesn't support building these add-ins. This only works for running a single file script. So there's the issue. Okay, the other part that is an issue with Office.js is the so-called web bloat. So this here, the screenshot is taken from a discussion on Hacker News that was about, well, Office.js. And it sort of like, articulates my feelings also a bit about the state of things. So it's too late, we're all doomed. And step 1 in the official XL add-ins tutorial includes installing Node.js and npm. And as funny as that is, it's only like half the truth, because it's really just not, it's not just Node and npm. It's also, you need to take a decision between JavaScript or TypeScript or Angular or React. That's like, what the quick start guide asks you. You need to know what like Yeoman does. You end up with build tools like Webpack and Bubble. So like, if you're not into web technology, it's like you look at that and you just walk away right away. And so basically that's what happened to me like 10 years ago. And so it took me like 10 years to get back to it. And also, like, after you've run through like the quick start on the official beginner's guide, what you end up with is a Node modules folder with 52,000 files and 600 megabyte of hard disk occupied for a single project, for a single Hello World project. So basically, to build a single little HTML file, that is what the build tools look like in today's modern HTML world. And so to put that a little bit into context, I guess it's sort of like understandable, because Office.js came out in 2012. And that was like really, the golden age of the so-called SPA's single page application. So Angular, which is Google's product, came out a few years before, and React, which is all over the place these days, came out, just shortly after Office.js. So it was really in that era where Office.js came out, and I would say like that, explains why this just like fits into that vibe right away. Only that it's now 2023, and there's been sort of like a counter movement now on the web. So it's not all about React and Angular anymore, and sort of like, people have understood that for much part of it, it's a duplication of efforts. You need a dedicated front-end developer. It's all much more expensive. And so there is this new school kind of frameworks that have come out, which allow you to basically get rid of most of your JavaScript code and get the logic back on the backend and work with templates there. But okay, that's sort of like a side problem, or sort of like a side story playing. We're gonna leave it at this here. But there's a couple of other issues with Office.js, and why I would assume it has sort of like struggled to gain a lot of momentum, even though it's been out for 10 years. And so one of the things is like, in VBA you do message box, or in standard HTML you do, or standard JavaScript you do alert, and you write a few words, and that just pops up in the user's face. Well, with Office.js you can do that, but you will need to design your own HTML, and you need to learn the dialog API, which is not the most straightforward piece of the Office.js ecosystem. So there's lots of things involved to achieve really simple things. Also, the documentation is sort of like, there's many things that are pointing to repositories or samples that are archived or discontinued. So it isn't like the most vibrant ecosystem that gets updated every day. And then finally, and that sort of like gives us the transition to our next topic here. In terms of backend, so like the Hello World that we've been looking at used GitHub Pages as a backend, which means sort of like no backend. It's just a server that throws those HTML static files at us. But you very much would like to use a real backend with a programming language, as we will see in the next section. And so Microsoft does include examples for those, but it's always, either Node or C#. And there's a ton of other very popular languages these days for the backend in web technology on the web backend, but there is no, samples that can get you off and running without too much effort. So that's a little bit the other issues that we have on top of just the API and the whole web front end maniac there. Okay, so that finally opens up the door for us. I mean, I would say like we should have understood everything that's required to sort of like dip now into Office.js and adding a proper backend with Python, and then xlwings to make the interaction between the two a little simpler. And so again, just to sort of like summarize or bring everybody on the same page, if you're using xlwings currently, pip install xlwings, and then you just run your script locally, or you call it from a macro button and you run the run Python call, then what happens is you have both Excel and Python installed locally on the same machine. Pretty much the reason number one why people have contacted me over these almost 10 years asking for like a better way to distribute this Python dependency. And I mean, the answer is obvious. It has to live on the server. And funny enough, I mean, xlwings server is something I've introduced about a year ago, and initially with support for Google Apps Script and for VBA and for Office scripts, the other thing. But not for Office.js. So like that has been around for a while, and now we're just leveraging it and use it from Office.js clients. And so, sorry. So to get to the next point, as I have mentioned a few times, so why would you actually want to have a real proper backend and not just a static file server that serves you this static HTML as we have done it in the very first Hello World sample? So there's many benefits you get from using a proper backend and implementing logic on the backend. And so I've already mentioned it. You can authenticate the user. So for example, you can allow certain users to access, a specific database and others not, or just about all the functionality of your add-in. Then very important for a lot of clients is I want to give an external client or even internally other people access to this add-in, to this functionality, but by no means they can get access to the source code. And so the source code, you put that on the backend, and that's where it stays out of sight of the user, because all you have in that HTML file is accessible by the user. So it's really just a web page, and you can just like pull up, look at the source of the web page like you do in the browser. That is true for the XL add-ins too. So that is a big concern for a lot of companies, and that solves it. Then obviously not just business logic, but like secrets, like database credentials, API access keys for external systems. They all reside on the backend, safe from being lost. And then you could also obviously get access to the file system. You could manipulate files on OneDrive or whatever cloud you're using. So these are all benefits you get from using a proper backend here, centralized logging, etc., etc. Now, so yeah, let's get into xlwings and how xlwings works with regard to the Office.js integration. And we're going to, like before in that Hello World example, we're going to go through an actual repository, an actual sample in just a second, and see how this all works out in practice. So yeah, so on the front end, what we end up with is instead of basically having to write code that looks like this, we pretty much get away with code that is just a single line, one JavaScript function you call run Python, you give it the URL of your backend, and that's pretty much it. And then on the backend, well, we have to write a web app. We have to use some sort of a web framework. Usually people these days use Django or Fast API, Starlet, anything. I mean, literally whatever your personal preference is. The screenshot here and my personal preference these days is Fast API. So we just handle a post request for a certain endpoint, which is the endpoint, that we call from the front end. And then there's a little bit of boilerplate code, and then there's a little at the beginning and at the end of the request. And other than that, we are back to standard classic xlwings syntax. So that is absolutely how you use xlwings every day if you use the classic local version. So that's sort of like how the front end and the back end are set up. And this brings us to the little demo for you to see how everything sort of like fits together. And I'm going to paste that link again in the chat, so you can also look it up. And so this time we cannot just download the XML manifest here and load it and expect it to work, because it requires a Python backend. So we can't just tell it to serve the files via GitHub static pages, because then at some point it would call into Python, and Python isn't available on GitHub pages. So what we're going to do is we're going to run that locally, and I'm going to switch over to my local VS Code and show you how this looks. But just in case you want to follow along after the webinar and try things out, there's a fairly extensive README below here. In essence, it looks like a lot of things to do, but it's, in essence, what you need to do is create like local certificates, because Microsoft requires you to access your web server on HTTPS, even if you run it on localhost. But that's a super simple solution out there these days. And then, yeah, it's pretty much about setting up Python and running the Python web app. And so that's what we're going to do. So I have this code, this repository here locally. I have this one file. So there is currently 2 different implementations of frameworks, FastAPI and Starlet, and I'm definitely going to add more frameworks over time. But even if there isn't a sample available, it's usually super easy to translate between these different frameworks. And so yeah, as before, so there is this HTML file with a bit of run Python, as we saw just now in the presentation. And so yeah, what I'm going to do is basically sort of like concentrate on the Python part here. So I am going to run that Python server locally just by running Python up server fastapi.py, and as you can see, that brings up that web server, and this is now ready to be used. You could also, there's in the README, you can see there's also the way of going through Docker. All you need to do is have Docker installed and then do a Docker compose up, and that also gives you the backend up and running. So you wouldn't even need to install Python locally, install the dependencies locally. If you're used to working with Docker, definitely worth a shot, or the easiest solution. Now we're going to switch over to Excel, and we need to sideload that manifest. And I'm on Mac here, so on Mac it's basically you drop that manifest into a specific folder, and then when you restart Excel, you will have it available over here for activation. And so I've just done that. I've loaded that add-in. We can actually get rid of that first to get a little bit of a nicer view. So we're gonna go back here to the quick start add-in. Again, I can tell it to show the side pane here, the task pane, just by going to that button. And as you can see, like when I load it, then I get the request here on my server. It serves the task pane HTML. And again, super boring, no CSS to do any styling, just 2 buttons. And as usual, we start with this guy first. Let me try to make this a little bigger here. So really the classic hello world sample. Let me switch that back to what it was. Click the button here, hello, bye. As you can see, this works pretty nicely. And then, yeah, if you wanna make any changes here, you can say, thanks for joining. You hit on save, and as you can see, that development server over here automatically reloads everything. So I can just click on that run button again, and everything is just updated the way that we have just coded it. To show you the sort of one of the issues that that the classic Office.js has and that xlwings solves for you is the alert, the classic, the venerable message box. So in xlwings land, you really, I mean, it continues to work that way. You just call alert with a couple of words for title and prompt, which buttons you want to show, and then let me add a few tabs here. And then you can click on that capitalize sheet names functionality. And so you get this message box, this alert pop-up window. It's a destructive action, right? So you want to make sure that you do what you really want to do it. And so like if you click cancel, as you can see, nothing changes. So the sheet names haven't been capitalized. But then if I say yes, then it will actually call the capitalize sheet names function. And then as you can see, it, a little bit of logic here to call the upper method. So like if I say yes, as you can see here, all the sheet names are now capitalized. And so that pretty much is how this basic functionality works. And so I've already shown you sort of like how it works for editing the code. For example, what I've touched upon before in Office.js, a real pain is error handling, because you will need to make that somehow visible to the end user. And that means writing a lot of code for sort of like, standard functionality. So like, let's say I'm introducing some sort of error here, which means like I'm accessing a sheet that doesn't exist. Then I would run that hello button again, and xlwings takes care of automatically displaying the error in a user-friendly way in again, that alert window for you. So there's a lot of functionality that xlwings in that sense takes over for you. Now, let me see. Yeah, I forgot to mention that you do not need to have the task pane. So remember, there's like 4 different options that Office.js allows you to use. Task pane is one of them. The other one would be just to directly hook up a button on your ribbon with the Python function. And so in that sense, this is the same as before. So like obviously now it has the issue here, but like if we change that back to something that works, then we can also just hit the button directly and get the message to show up in this cell here. So like if your skills are really, really hairy in terms of like, designing a task pane, you can get away with it by creating or hooking up the functionality directly to the button itself. All right, let me see what else I forgot. I guess that's pretty much it in terms of this little quick start demo I wanted to show you about Office.js with xlwings. And yeah, just to prevent misunderstandings is you absolutely don't need xlwings to have a Python backend with an Office.js front end. And that's sort of like one of my critiques, that there should be samples on the official documentation that show you how you can talk to a Python backend from a standard Office.js add-in. And so the way you would do that is instead of running instead of like basically doing the run Python call here, you would just stick to that ugly Office.js API that I have shown you, and you would just use basically a fetch command in JavaScript that then sends, communicates with your backend. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit of lot of more work for you to do. You have to design user interfaces. You have to do the data conversion between Excel and basically the JavaScript world and the Python world. So there's lots of things that obviously xlwings gives you, but just to make sure that's not the only option here. So, and to conclude, I would also just like to mention that, yeah, Office.js is really just one option to talk to a server-based version of xlwings. You can use, VBA. There's this run remote Python call. You can use Office scripts. You just have to, select the script and run it, and it also can talk to xlwings server. And you can even use the other one, the other spreadsheet, Google Sheets, where it integrates into Google Apps script. And that all uses the same server. So the server you only, write once, and then like you give everybody the Office.js add-in, let's say, and then it doesn't work on one machine because maybe it's too old for Office.js, or it just doesn't work. So we give them the VBA add-in, and you should be good to go. And so before I look at your questions on the chat, a little look ahead. So next up on the Office.js journey here is support for user-defined functions. That's going to be like really great, because for the first time in almost 10 years, we're going to have support for user-defined functions, or custom functions, the way that Microsoft started to call them, on macOS and also on web, which is really, really huge. They're multiple times faster than what we currently have in xlwings. They're asynchronous by nature. So like, you fire off a user-defined function and you can continue to use Excel. And whenever the calculation is done, it'll be populated. Then you get like a cool namespace thing here. So like you can do like your functions are going to be grouped under your add-in or whatever it is, dot your function. And then you get the IntelliSense right in the cell. So that is also something that isn't available out of the box for the current implementation, or even for VBA user-defined function. So that's all like really, really nice. The other things I'm going to look into in the future is adding support for events. So you could eventually, for example, put a button on a sheet and have the click event on that little design element or whatever you use for your button react, basically trigger a function. So there's lots of interesting things that Office.js supports. And then also that's just sort of like a general thing, adding sort of like fixing the holes that currently still are on basically the xlwings server side of things. Not every single functionality is supported at this moment, but yeah, every release adds a few of these functions. So definitely a ton of things that you can do right away today. And most importantly, it's always comes with support for the conversion with the NumPy arrays and pandas data frame. So that's all there and ready for you to use. And so yeah, let me actually, before I cut this off, have a look at the chat and see if I can answer any questions you had. So I have a question about functionality of Office.js for basic text analysis in Excel, like tagging or labeling. There is no limits of what you can do. I mean, you can obviously you can stick to like the basic hello world that we looked at the beginning. And at this point, you can do anything you can do in a web app, which means like you can load a JavaScript library, which is very nice. So like there's no limits on what you can do there. So you can just, I believe there's like TensorFlow and whatnot that is available for JavaScript. You can load that into JavaScript and just use it. Or you can obviously use the backend, Python with xlwings, Python without xlwings, Ruby, whatever your preferred backend technology is, and then use whatever language model you need on the backend. So yes, definitely. So then there's another question. I assume the code is fully obfuscated if hosted on the developer server. So yeah, I believe I touched on that. So the code is basically on your server, the code, if you use a backend server, right? So like if you use xlwings, the code is on the backend. It doesn't leave the backend. It's as secure as it could possibly be. It's as secure as your server is, let's put it that way. That is only true if you use a backend. If you use the first option where you have everything in HTML, then that's exposed to the end user. So yeah, better use a backend. I'm intrigued by not requiring a server at all. Does this mean you can run Python code within an Excel instance without any external dependencies? That's another question. So that's a question that today I have to say no, you cannot do that. You have to use a backend server with Python installed on it. But in the future, or whenever somebody tackles it, I mean, the technology is here. You can actually embed Python in a web page, right? So there is a couple of different projects based on WASM, the WebAssembly project. One of them is called, I believe, mscripten. The other one is sort of like building on top of that, which is called PyScript. And what it does is it really embeds the Python interpreter in your web page, HTML page. And so yeah, you can definitely melt the two worlds together and get rid of your backend. But again, I mean, that may be a good thing, or that may not be the thing you want, because you expose obviously then the source code to the end user. But yeah, it's definitely that's an exciting sort of like development that I will look into the future, but you are able to do that already now. So then there's another question. Does the client need to have a Python environment installed on their machine? No, no, absolutely no. So that's one of the points of the whole thing. Yeah, left the old world where they had to install Python on their machine. Right, the new current modern world where Python sits on a server. You just deploy it once. If you have an update, you deploy the update to the server. You have one single location, and everybody who opens the workbook, whether that's on Office Online or whether that's on your desktop, they get instantly access to the latest bug fixes or latest functionalities that you offer with your add-in from the web server. So yeah, that's definitely a very, very good step forward there. What if you know good Python, can understand HTML, but not a single idea of JavaScript? Well, yeah, I mean, that is basically why I created the xlwings integration. So as long as you understand that this is how you have to write a JavaScript function, then you just overwrite the URL to the Python function on the web server, and that's it. So like you don't have to know JavaScript. So like if we look at the JavaScript like involved, so over here, then there's really little JavaScript involved. So like 10 lines, and it's copy paste from the documentation. So I believe that's a handle. I mean, it should be really handle to be users should be able to handle it, even if they don't talk Office.js. Then John still likes VB8. That's all right. Just be aware of that. Microsoft has stopped investing in it. Then, yeah, where do we have some other questions? Very cool, but terrifying to a non-Python person. I guess so. So usually, yeah, xlwings user would have to know a little bit of Python. What would the user experience be if the backend goes down or the client has connectivity issues? So I can demo that real quick. So so let's say the backend, we get so many hits. Sorry about that. Here we get so many hits that the backend basically dies. In that case, what is happening is we get an error in the add-in. We can retry. Yeah, now it probably took it from the cache. Yeah, again. So yeah, that's not a very good demo, but like whenever the server is up and running again, it should then, it should then work again. So that is sort of like how it works. You could probably also like skim through the App Store. Probably half of the add-ins in there, don't work anymore because the backend isn't maintained anymore. Yeah, I believe that this is pretty much it in terms of answering your questions. So yeah, definitely invite you, go check out those repositories, go check out the documentation. Like if you scroll down on the left, then there is the Office.js add-ins. And then probably we see each other again for the introduction of the custom functions, aka UDFs, user-defined functions. All right, thanks so much for everyone for sticking around. And if you want to continue the discussion, then let me know. Other than that, you will get the replay no later than tomorrow. And yeah, anything else, hit me up on social media or send me an email, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.